Welcome to the Voice of Retail for the week of July 8th, 2019. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, and this podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. In this episode, the three amigos, myself, Store 2019 MainStage keynote speaker and Forbes contributing writer Steve Dennis, and retail strategist Carl Boutet mix it up in the Purolator Podcasting Studio after the Excellence in Retail Gala Awards. We talk tech, north-south retail, the collapse of the middle, bifurcation, success at the high end, the world's slowest liquidation sale, customer trapeze, and retail success stories. Also from the Purolator Podcasting Studio, an interview with retail brand marketing legend John Torella, who between being the CMO for Eaton's, then on the agency side, and finally almost 30 years advising retailers at the highest strategic level, reflects on a rich career and the changes and pace of change in the modern retail environment. Next, we'll cover off retail this week, including Vancouver becoming a global launchpad for international retail brands, Empire fights back with innovation, swapping chairs at Giant Tiger, Korean brand Innisfree launches retail in Canada, Lululemon's new 20,000 square foot Chicago store, Microsoft Retail learns from Fifth Avenue for Oxford Circus, Bad Boy gets bigger and badder, AI-powered retail sustainability, and how green is your shipping. But first, let's listen into my up-close and interactive chat with Steve Dennis and Carl Boutet from the Purolator Podcasting Studio right after the RCC Excellence in Retail Awards Gala. Carl, Steve Dennis, welcome to the Purolator Podcast Studio here at Store 2019. How was your day today, seeing the best of that retail has to offer in Canada and actually around the world reflected on our stage?
Impressive. I mean, it was. I like that last one. I think it showed a lot of respect and the sense of leadership. You know, that the people that were commenting, his team was commenting on everything he did. I thought was really incredible. I hope he's going to cherish that video for a long time.
Yeah, we're speaking of Ron Wilson, who won Retail of the Year from Best Buy in Canada. Yeah. And Steve, you've been here. You're on the stage first thing tomorrow, but yeah. you've had the opportunity to sit through yet another conference, but maybe different perspectives and different sets of speakers. Some the same, Helena folks from HBC and some others. Any takeaways from any of the sessions you saw or the conversations you had here?
I mean, I thought it was a really good day. I thought there were a lot of great perspectives and a lot of variety. A lot of the themes I think are the same as I hear, in the States and elsewhere. Maybe a little bit more on the smaller, independent, emerging retailer side. I mean, that was the one thing I think I picked up on a little bit. We were talking about earlier, cannabis retail's taking off here. Yep. Maybe not quite yet so much. In other places of the world, but I thought it was a good day.
It's in Canada we kind of look to the U.S. and we try to understand what's happening in the U.S. market, and then the second step in that is trying to figure out, okay, what's different in the Canadian market, if anything, and there's differences, just like there's differences in the U.S. market from coast to coast. Sure. I mean, it's a bit of a fallacy to say there's a U.S. customer, and just as much as there is to say there's a Canadian customer. But there are some lessons to translate. I mean, that's always been the interesting thing when, let's talk about U.S. retailers coming to Canada. Some have been very successful and just have nailed it over the course of time. I think of Walmart came here in, 1984, bought a company called Woolco, and have really been a powerhouse, which kind of proves out the model that the Canadian shopper, not dissimilar from the U.S. shopper in some ways. And others have been quite less successful. Yeah. So I've always, and I wanted to get your thoughts on the differences between the two consumers and it's a little hard because in absolute terms, Carl, you probably spend more time in Canada. Steve, you spend more time in the U.S. But Steve, if you had to describe the state of mind of retailers and the consumer in the U.S., times are good in the U.S. from a retail perspective and, absolute terms. Individually it's quite choppy.
In absolute terms, I think, I'll talk about this a little bit tomorrow in the context of the collapse of the middle, but, and I assume this is true to a degree here, but the middle class has really shrunk in the U.S. and a lot of lower income consumers have also gotten hit pretty hard, which is why I think you see a lot of migration down from the kind of moderate department store space into the off-price discount space.
Actually, I can't remember the exact numbers, so I don't want to quote any numbers, but the percentage of new store openings in the U.S., and to some degree Canada, I think less so, is in the dollar store categories. It's just huge, right?
Yeah, it's overwhelmingly skewed towards dollar stores, TJ Maxx, off-price, that sort of, Aldi, but basically the value discount oriented stores are the lion's share of growth.
the store openings, but the profit is actually at the high end, right? If you saw that report a couple of years ago that showed all the growth was coming from the low end, but the profit was all coming from the couple of luxury brands that were launching were generating 90% of the profit.
Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag. There's a Deloitte study I've seen which has looked at
the bifurcation study.
Yeah, the bifurcation, which shows you're absolutely right. I mean, a lot of outlet growth, but actually
the profits
plenty of
the high
sales
end.
and profit growth tilted towards the high end. But I mean, I think the key point though is really that bifurcation and that split and how difficult it is to stake out a point in the middle.
You know, we say the collapse of the middle, though. I think we were actually ahead of that in Canada in many ways. I think our middle collapsed. We had 4 department stores 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
We're down to 1 that's having a hard time it's hard to get the kitchen.
1 or 2. I have thrown Simon's into that,
Yeah, but Simon's is more like a specialty clothing department store. I mean, they're not.
Do you know Simon's or Quebec?
Yeah, a little
based?
bit. Yeah,
They're like Nordstrom's.
super well. Yeah.
So if you put Nordstrom's in department
Right.
stores, then I guess we put Simon's.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking of how we lost Eaton, Simpsons before that. We've had
Sears, of course.
Sears was
Yeah.
the last.
Right.
Sears is still
Sort of technically alive.
technically.
Steve, I loved your quote. Was it like lives to die again?
Yeah,
I think for Sears,
The
right?
longest-
As a past Sears
Well, yeah, I mean,
employee.
having worked there, I've had a long time to think of clever little things to say about them since I think I've called them the world's slowest liquidation sale for at least 7 or 8 years.
God.
So let's talk about Sears. Let's get into that a little bit. So, they're opening new stores.
Oh my God.
Which is kind of in one way mind altering. Another way, I got to give them credit for the chutzpahs to try and do it. But is there any leader that can come in and turn that business around, or is it just fundamentally just not?
No, I mean, I actually, and who knows whether I would have been right about. But one of the reasons why I left in 2003 was I couldn't see. We spent. I always say it's the most oxymoronic title in retail. I was the head of strategy at Sears Roebuck. But we spent a good couple of years, millions of dollars on consultants, all this consumer research, and we could figure out some ways to make it better. But I couldn't see a way, and others couldn't see a way to make it good at any point. So I mean, I think the game was over for Sears many, many years ago. And so I can't get my head around how anybody. I mean, it's obviously gotten far, far worse in terms of the operating performance, in terms of the brand relevance, the growth of competition. I mean, everything has just gotten harder and harder. So, I guess it's sort of interesting that they're trying some new stores. But the stores they're trying are almost identical to the stores that we opened 15 years ago.
They're like a home store, right?
Yeah, we
Tell us
opened. We did a lot of format. I wasn't involved in all of them, but we did mattress store, we did appliance and tool stores, there's a whole bunch of specialty-ish home-related concepts that we tried, and none of them worked particularly well. I would say we didn't necessarily implement them as well. I mean, I could see how we could have implemented them better, and perhaps they would have done better, but that's everything old is new again, I guess. But I don't see any way that ends well.
As an ex Black & Decker guy, it was in Black & Decker. Now Black & Decker still bought Craftsman, and I've actually made a pretty good go of it. There's distributing in Lowe's, and in Canada they're Lowe's Rona, and talking to the associates in the store, thumbnail of 5 conversations. They say, it does pretty well. It's still a strong brand, and Sears been gone from Canada for a couple of years, right?
Well, I think the thing when I joined the company, which I think was during the Bronze Age, was the Craftsman market share in the U.S. anyway, but I think it was pretty similar in Canada, was in the 40s.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it has gone down a lot. But, the fundamental problem for Craftsman, Kenmore, and some of those brands that were super powerful 20, 30 years ago were they were ultimately in the wrong distribution. It became pretty clear in the late 90s that Lowe's and Home Depot were going to win. Yeah. And the challenge was, what could you possibly do to the mall stores that was somehow going to counteract what made Home Depot and Lowe's a fundamentally better mousetrap.
And Carl, when I think of Canada, I think reflect back in 1999. I was launching HBC, Hudson's Bay's first e-commerce site. And we looked at Sears Canada and we're like, we'll never beat those guys. Like, they got they owned like 80% of the catalog business. They got it all figured out. And if they didn't have it figured out, they had warehouses, they had pick and pack, they had the people who knew how to run catalog business. We're like, we'll never catch up to them. Maybe we'll just take a few bites out of them here and there. That's the most shocking thing to me, is that that kind of lead and advantage would just never translated into success.
And how quickly it vaporizes. Because you're saying 20, 30 years ago, Sears, when I got into the home appliance business through the co-op,
sure.
in the furniture co-op, and in 2011-12, they still had 40% market share. In 2017, it's gone.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, I got a Kenmore in my house, right? I mean, you go out, they had enough scale to make differentiated product. I mean, the formula was right.
But to go to 40% market share to zero in 5 years.
Yeah.
So, since we're on the topic of struggling retailers, we talked about JCPenney a little bit. Again, same question. I mean, they tried, what was his name? Ron Johnson tried a very revolutionary, let's get out of EDLP.
Yeah.
Two schools of thought. One is he never had enough time to execute the full run of it. The second school of thought is it never was going to work.
Yeah.
Well, I think he even admitted that it was too. He came on too strong. He recognizes now that he pushed a little. He was trying to move too fast for that. He would have
too much too
soon.
In
hindsight, he would have given it a little more time and tried to do it more incrementally. But that's not where he came from. In his world, it was.
There's lessons to be learned in that, because Target, as you know, came to Canada now 4 years ago, and they tried too much too soon. 130 stores, and it just collapsed around their ears before they could even have a chance to move, right?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's I think relevant to the pennies thing in particular. I was told, one of the senior partners at Bain & Company, I remember years ago, saying that it's very hard to change your customer base too quickly. That. And I've talked about it subsequently as what I call the customer trapeze, which is letting go of one customer, but you better be sure there's something to grab onto on the other side. And I think in Ron's case,
that's a great term. I love that.
In Ron's case, he was like a lot of retailers. You aspire to have a different customer. At Sears, we aspired to have some different customers, but the trade-off is the more you become more contemporary, younger, more fashionable, etc. The customers that are paying the bills are often the ones that suddenly go, wait a minute, this is not my store anymore, which we saw in spades with what Ron did at Penny's. But it's it's a real challenge for a retailer that's been around a long time, that has a very well-established brand in the consumer's mind, to suddenly
be something else.
Think you're going to suddenly change their mind. So I think there really aren't. I've looked at this a little bit. There really aren't very many brands that have made a real transformation of their customer base, in a radical way, quickly. You can look at maybe Cadillac or some brands, but in many cases they stumbled, or IBM or something, but that went from a really different product line. But it took a long time, and a lot of money, and typically some stumbles along the way.
I've always wondered if if you'd be better off if you're Penny, let's say, instead of piling all this money and trying to reinvent yourself, take that money and launch a new brand. Like, grab the know-how, maybe the logistics, grab the that stuff, but don't try to reinvent a brand that's so much legacy tied to it. You probably get much better return on investment if you took that money, put it into some investing group's hands, and say, okay, let's launch the next direct-to-consumer.
I think the benefit of hindsight, that would have been. I mean, to use the Sears, because we've spent a lot of time looking at pennies. I mean, I think that, and some of this, some people were in favor of or could see happening. Others, this is very hindsight. But if Sears had invested the bulk of its money in basically maintaining the mall stores, but investing in home improvement warehouses, whether they built them themselves or acquired Lowe's and Home Depot at a time where you could have. You could have migrated the Craftsman and the Kenmore businesses off the mall. You would have participated in one of the great growth categories in home, and you may or may not have had a decent soft lines business on the mall, but you could have closed those down over time, rather than
real estate you can move, right?
Yeah, rather than try, to fix something that just is very, very broken.
Wasn't that even the Sears model going back to the 50s and 60s? And look at all the brands they owned. Didn't they own real estate brands? It
was a real conglomerate. I mean, they're very
diversified.
Well, they're very integrated. Yeah, a lot of the malls that were built were part of the Sears Roebuck and Company conglomerate, and so they were able to really leverage a lot of interplay.
I think like even Allstate, was it?
They own an insurance company, they own Dean Witter brokerage company.
Dean Witter.
Socks and Stocks was the. So.
Let's pivot or transition from there into success stories. So who do you like? When you look on both sides of the border, who do you like? Who do you look to and say, whether it's the model or they're just doing all the right things, or I guess favor on one hand someone everyone would know, and on the other hand someone maybe needs a second look. Anything come to mind, Steve?
Well, I mean, when we got to qualify like who's doing well, well in the sense that they're growing, or well in the sense that they're profitable. Because I think one of the things that's skewing a lot of our perception right now is we're seeing these great stories of direct to consumer brands and new retail concepts, and we're amazed by their growth trajectory. I'm thinking of like the Warby Parkers and these guys, which do phenomenal retail, but they haven't made a profit in 10 years, right? But they're inspiring a lot of change. They're provoking a lot of important conversations. So if the question is who's inspiring us with growth, then I think there's a lot of these direct to consumer brands, the Glossiers and all that. Now, who's actually operating and having to play by the rules where they have investors that that are expecting ROI,
right?
It's a different playbook, and now it actually becomes a lot tougher to find those.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's one of the I joked around in the past that if it was okay at Sears for us to have negative 20% EBITDA, we could have put a lot of sales associates on the floor. We could have done a lot, but that wasn't where we were, and certainly a lot of these digitally native vertical brands just that many of them are not yet anyway. Making
it reminds me of your April Fool's post, right?
It's pretty easy to create a business if you're not burdened by
the nuances of making money.
I just imagine, like, I put myself in the head like I'm an executive at Wayfair right now, and I'm just staring at the call display, praying that Amazon or Walmart pops up on my call display.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think we're for sale. Yeah. I think that's pretty much the only exit for a lot of these players. Is that in case of Wayfair, specifically, these large ones, their hyper growth has actually penalized them. They've become so big that there's only 2 or 3 companies out there left that can even acquire them.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. But I hope a few. But I think some really. I mean, I think a great Canadian retail story is Canada Goose. I think it's an amazing brand. They're just doing so many things well and growing and profitable. But it is hard to find a lot. I mean, I think brands like they're maybe not so sexy, but Sephora, Ulta, brands that have been around for a while that continue to open stores, post not amazing growth numbers, but pretty solid top line growth and profit. Yeah,
well, you one of your posts who didn't get the memo, and you get Lululemon in there too.
Yeah, I mean, there's you get some of these brands that despite the retail apocalypse narrative, continue to open a lot of stores and continue to post. Pretty good numbers.
Results, right?
Well, and particularly when they're, even though I know Nordstrom, we'll talk about them tomorrow, but Nordstrom's had a little bit of a bump the last couple of quarters. That's a very, very mature brand that's still got, really good operating margins, not a ton of growth, but has gained pretty good market share over the last 10 or 15 years.
And doing all the right things. I mean, it's hard to find a box they're not ticking, and very thoughtful. When you listen to the Nordstrom brothers talk, I mean, you can't help but think these guys have got a realistic expectations. I don't think they've got it all figured out, but they're
it's
very humble about their approach from that perspective.
It's just not the kind of business that they can't double the store count. They can't. Right. I mean, there's just limits to.
Unlike their small footprint, though. Did you say
the local stores
had like 30 of those now?
Oh no, not yet. But they've got 3 open and 2 more they're going to open in New York, and I suspect they're going to open quite a lot.
Well, they've actually this week announced that's really where they're going. Yeah. I mean, this is the format that they're going to probably invest their future on.
Well, their rack gets them the new customers, right? They said like 60% of their new customers, some percentage like that, come from the rack, and then they evolve up or grow up in the system.
I think the really brilliant thing, just getting a little tangent on Nordstrom Local, but I think a lot of retailers are going to have to think about this, and it gets to this idea of different metrics. Getting away from sales per square foot and focusing on the different channel metrics, but really thinking about, what is our trade area and how do we maximize our potential with our customers in a trade area where you think about the store as maybe the hub of the brand, but you don't care particularly whether you're driving the business in store or online. And I think with Nordstrom Local, they don't have opportunities to open 5 more full-line stores in LA or 3 in Vancouver, right? Mm-hmm. But can they have 1 Vancouver store and 4 or 5 of these local stores, grow their market share, steal some business away, offer some new products and services? Yeah. So it's not going to be this massive growth story, but a way, I think, to really drive more share of wallet, more local market share. I think it's fantastic.
I'm fascinated by these new metrics we're trying to figure out. Like they get us away from the per square foot and get us, like one of my favorite
experience per square foot.
Well, not even that one's tough. I mean, I know. Well, you're asking a retailer that I admire is Beta. I think is a really cool one because they have this whole. Instead of pay-per-click, pay-per-engagement model and how they monetize the data more than the product. I don't know if it scales. I don't know if it's profitable, but just that mindset is really interesting. But I'm doing some work right now trying to figure out what are the metrics that you can create some sort of cultural alignment around that it doesn't polarize your e-com to your physical store, because those are your silos who belong on farms. That we're still reinforcing that by a lot of the metrics that the organizations are pulling. So how can you rethink these metrics that align everybody together? And so far, the best one I think I can find is it's a holistic one, and it's a difficult one to actually nail down. But customer lifetime value is something I'm paying more and more attention to.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you can build, easier said than done, but I think if you can build your metrics up from the customer, and whether you have to sign a customer to a particular store or zip code or whatever, and you could easily measure. I know a few retailers that have done it. Comp customer performance, comp trade area performance, irrespective of you still have to sort of say this store. I'm going to sign these zip codes or whatever. But it's I'd much rather have a retailer say, and when we look at it market by market, we're growing 10%. Okay, now that happens to be 30% online and -1 in store, let's say, or however the math would work. But actually, we are increasing customer relevance and ultimately customer lifetime value. And you don't get into, you still have to certainly think about how much money you have invested in the market and your marketing costs, but to do it customer up. Customer by geography,
which if you think of the FIs, the financial institutions do a lot of that work, right? The customer segmentation. They don't think branch, online, ATM. They're thinking customer segment.
Absolutely right. So I think we have to get there, because I think that number one, you can make a lot of stupid store closing decisions. You can make a lot of bad marketing decisions by doing these siloed metrics. At some point, we were talking about this earlier. The landlords are going to have to deal. If you're getting paid on, per square footage, suddenly you've got this really weird thing, right? Where you may have a store which is incredibly productive for the brand, but doesn't ring up a lot of sales in that location. How do you get paid for that? So one way or another, from a retailer performance, from a landlord performance, from the industry performance, we're going to have to get some better metrics, or we're going to really not understand what's going on.
Well, listen, Carl, Steve, it's been a great conversation. I think we should kind of book this one in to have it a regular reoccurring theme as if you would, in the Voice of Retail, because it's great to chat with you both. It's such a great valued perspective. So thanks again for being on the Voice of Retail and Purolator Podcast Studio. Steve, welcome to Toronto. Looking forward to your session tomorrow morning, and Carl, welcome as well. And looking forward to continuing to keep up with you.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thanks, Michael.
John, welcome to the Purolator Podcast Studio here at Store 2019. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me.
Look, it's a real treat to have the opportunity to chat with you. Such an amazing career advising retailers at the most senior level. So I wanted to start off a little bit about your personal journey.
Sure.
How you got into this crazy game we call retail. Tell us about yourself a little bit.
Well, I was very fortunate. I started with Eaton's, a great department store at the time, as a copywriter in the creative department. That was my passion at the time. And over a 10-year period, I worked myself into the strategy end, marketing end, and ended up being the CMO of Eaton's at that time, Chief Marketing Officer. And I was fortunate to be part of a team that Fred Eaton brought in to really launch the new Eaton's in the Eaton Center. This was going to be a 1 million square foot department store, the first one that had been built in 40 years in Canada. And became part of a team that then went on to open the Pacific Center in Montreal. And it was a great time.
Sure.
But
Kind of the salad days of Canadian retail.
It really was.
I mean, Eaton's it's been gone for many, many years, but it was such a great retailer in its time, right? It's so many innovations happened with the Eaton's business.
Absolutely. But like everything, you're young and ambitious, and so I thought, well, I know everything there is to know about department stores. I got to find out about the other aspects of the business. And I went to Vickers and Benson with a team there that was really quite remarkable in terms of the clients they had and the scope of business. They were into every aspect of retail, but much more than that, political and financial and automotive. And they said, come on in and run the retail group. I said, okay. So I went in and had a chance to work with people like McDonald's, Dave Nickel at Loblaws and President's Choice, Sporting Life. And so I spent 10 years there, became a partner, and just loved every minute of it. Because it really took what I was doing to another level of creativity.
Sure.
Like everything, you say, okay, well, what's the next thing?
Right.
I sort of sat back and had a chat at the time with my wife, and I said, all my life I've worked in Canada. I really like to get more of an international feel.
Now, where are you from? We skipped over a little bit. Where are you born and raised?
I was born here in Toronto.
Oh, Toronto native.
Yeah.
Okay.
Italian heritage, Bella Figura, love of life. Anyways, so John Williams, who had the J.C. Williams Group, a retail consulting company, he was at Eaton's. He was part of that team. He went off and started this consulting company, and he was always bugging me, John, you got to come, you got to come. So anyways, I said, okay, I'm ready. And John was part of the Ebeltoft Group, which is a non-equity relationship with other retail consulting companies, 17 countries around the world.
Like a big network of like-minded people, really,
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely, that's what it was. Well, I went there, and over the period of time, I got to work in Singapore, Mumbai, Buenos Aires, Sao Paulo, Istanbul. Just incredible to get that kind of exposure, because brand, and that's my focus, marketing, communication, branding, it's in the eye of the beholder, and every one of these countries you go to, they see brand in a different way. But it was a wonderful experience. And
you literally wrote the book on retail branding. In fact, I have your book here, so I'm going to get you to sign it before you go. Here it is. This amazing workbook. I used it myself. This is your book. I'm going to get you to sign it. Tell me about your perspectives around retail branding, and I want to get not as much a historical perspective, but because you're still looking at, and you still spend time right in retail today, helping retailers. But give me your perspective of, I guess, let me frame the question. What's different and what's the same in terms of retail branding, and from your perspective?
Well, it's interesting because it's certainly evolved in terms of my understanding of my awareness of it, my acceptance of it. But the thing I think that differentiates what we've done at the J.C. Williams Group and what I'm focused on is that we're all about process. We're all about the hows. And there's some wonderful speakers who speak on branding with great presentations today. And they're very motivational and inspirational.
Yeah.
But, we sort of say, okay, they've created the desire. Now we're going to help you execute.
They've created an appetite to be greater, but okay, how do you get from where you are today to where you will be?
And, a lot of our clients are small to medium. They don't have all the resources. And so they're really looking for what I sort of position myself as, the trusted advisor.
Right.
John, come in and help us. And I say, okay, that's what we do. We help you as an individual. We help your company be more successful, however you define success. And the tool that we use, the process that we use, is the art, science, and craft of branding. They said, well, that sounds pretty good. What do you really mean? I said, well, branding is all about differentiation. If you're not different, and you're not unique, and you're not special, you're a commodity, and you're interchangeable. And that's why there's so much demise in retail today.
Right.
Because it's boring. It's not differentiated enough. It's not emotional. There's no connection. There's no hook. And so they go, okay, so that sounds good. What do I do next?
Right.
And we lay out the process, the 8 steps. It starts with, you got to know where you are. How are you currently perceived? How are you seen? How do people feel about you?
Right.
And that's a very research, data, analysis-driven process. Well, you get friction there at that because most of the small retailers say, well, John, we don't have the budgets to do that.
Yeah, can we just hurry up and move on to the next step?
Yeah,
kind of stuff,
yeah.
right?
Take me to the end. I said, well, here's what we like to do. Let's get your leadership team. Let's sit them down. There's so much information out there on the web today. Let's at least do that. Let's go out and at least experience the competition. See what they're doing. See how they're positioned. And collectively, we'll put around the table, your leadership team, we'll direct them, and we'll come to at least a base of information, data, but most importantly, just insights on your business. Okay, they said, we can do that. There's not a lot of cost. It's going to take some time.
Yeah.
So that's kind of step one. The next step is an interesting one because it's really evolved, and that's what's the culture? What's culture? Isn't that HR? Isn't that about hiring people? It's much more than that. It's the way you work. It's the way you do things. It's the way you hire. It's the way you fire.
In your process, you really connect culture to brand, right?
Absolutely. It's the fusion of culture and brand.
Right.
But we really spend a good deal of time analyzing the culture. The symbols of your business, the rituals of your business, the processes you use, the way you evaluate, the respect you have, the diversity you have, all of that kind. So that's, that'll take a couple of meetings or so.
Yeah.
And now, we're a third into the process. And we start to get a little more honed, and at that point we start to talk about brand. And I said, well, what is it? The brand is the emotional connection you have or don't have with the end consumer. It's deep. It's in many cases subconscious. It's hard to define it, but when you have it, you know it.
Kind of like that judge said, I know it when I see it.
That's right? Absolutely, Mike. So that's kind of gets us into the brand, and then we start to get even more focused on what's the strategy. And strategy is used and misused.
Sure.
We have a very simple definition. Strategy is a compelling competitive advantage that either does or does not create a superior customer benefit that can only be replicated by your competition over a long period of time at great cost. That's strategy. Most of what retailers talk about.
I love that last part. Replicated only after a long period of time and at great cost, right?
And most retailers don't have strategy. They have tactics.
Right.
So that creates a lot of discussion. How can we make this compelling competitive advantage? Is it our product? Assortment? Is it the store experience? Is it the multi-channel experience? Is it all of those things, And, you gotta decide, because that then becomes the absolute focus, the concentration.
I've heard it often said that, in summary, strategy is about making decisions. You can be one thing or you can be the other, but if you're in the middle, not so good. Let's think about today, when you look at the retail landscape in Canada, who's doing it right? When you look at we've got a lot of international retailers coming into Canada in large and small ways. You got great domestic retailers going global. You have some that are not. Yeah. But when you think about, you should take a look at these 3 or 4 retailers.
Yeah. Well, I'll talk about the ones we work with because those are the ones I know. Aldo, global brand.
Yeah.
Absolute point of difference, unique experience, great product, evolved, over the years from, father down into the son. I think they've done a great job. Certainly President's Choice, and, working with Dave Nickel and Loblaws was an experience, to say the least.
An experience of a lifetime.
Beat you up every day of the week,
Yeah.
But President's Choice, I think, rewrote the book on private label, for grocery.
Yeah. And in many ways continues. I mean, even this week in the news, they talked about they're launching a whole line of plant-based, forward-thinking plant-based. Last year they were selling crickets and cricket powder. I mean, there's no stopping their seemingly their end of innovation.
We spent 7 years working with Andrew Jennings at Holtz when he was here, and that was a great experience. I think they've lost a lot of the magic that he had at the time, I think. I haven't been involved with them for at least a decade. But, those are some of them, and there are many others. Certainly Indigo, I think. I love the new concept, the store at Yorkdale, great one, the new one at Sherway.
Yeah.
Le Chateau with Hershey Siegel, great experience. So there are many out there.
So in the kind of few minutes we got left, give us your advice, or give our listeners your advice. If you're at the other end, you're starting a career in retail, where should you focus your time and effort? What advice do you have to people who are in retail today?
Well, we're in a multi-channel, omni-channel, whatever you want to call it.
No channel, just the customer channel or whatever, right?
It's the path to purchase the customer goes through. And I think you've got to understand that path to purchase. You've got to understand the desire of, we hear a lot about frictionless experience. But it just means, how do you take the confusion, the lack of trust out of that experience and make it a memorable experience, a lasting experience? And be prepared to build a team, because it can't be done by one. It's got to be top down and bottom up.
Right.
Have patience, because it takes time. Have the resources to do it, because it also costs.
Yeah.
But you got to have a purpose. Got to get up every day and focus on that purpose, and you got to do it with great passion.
So how do listeners get a hold of you if they want to learn more and maybe do some work with J.C. Williams?
J.C. Williams Group.
Yeah.
J. Torella at J.C. Williams Group.
Well, John, it was a real treat to spend some time with you. Thanks for joining us on the Voice of Retail podcast, and look forward to many more times seeing each other at store. I think you and I have seen each other here many times, and it's always great to see you. So thanks again for being on the podcast.
My pleasure.
Well, all right. Well, thanks to Steve, Carl, and John for being my guests this week. Special shout out for John Torella. He was inducted into the Retail Council of Canada's Retail Hall of Fame in 2013, along with his partner and cohort, John Williams from J.C. Williams. And of course, if you've been listening to the podcast or go back a couple episodes, Willie Crew from KPMG was inducted, I guess you could say, into the Retail Council of Canada's Retail Hall of Fame this year in 2019. All right, well, let's hit the highlights from retail this week. E-newsletter, biggest retail weekly in Canada. You can subscribe on retailcouncil.org. Kind of a companion piece to the podcast as we kind of look at the top interesting news stories in retail for the past week, 51 weeks of the year. Kicking off with the article from Business of Vancouver. Vancouver serving as a North American launchpad for global retailers. So nothing new here. Craig Patterson and others have been talking about how Canada is certainly a big destination for international retailers. What I thought was interesting about this article was how Vancouver is being seen as quoted in this article, an ideal testing ground, particularly for companies in the Asia-Pacific region. both from geography and also from proximity and also from audience, so to speak, composition or the representation in Vancouver. So interesting article there, Business of Vancouver. Empire CEO, that would be Michael LeBlanc, says, innovation is the future. And this is a quote from a media analyst call he did that, that Project Sunrise is almost complete. The big project finishing or moving ahead quite well that helps bring efficiencies and drive efficiencies within the Empire business, Sobeys and other banners. And now really his mission is to make it the most innovative retail in Canada. So clean it up. Has started to launch Freshcos out west and do all kinds of interesting things. Of course, bought Farm Boy last year. So lots more, I'm sure, to come from our friends at Empire. Paul Wood named to succeed Thomas Haig as president of Giant Tiger. This from Grocery Business. Not Giant Tiger, but Thomas Haig I know quite well from our days together at Zellers and continuing to work with him at Giant Tiger. Paul Wood, great choice. Great to see him taking over that chair. He was currently Executive Vice President CFO. Before that, VP Finance. So great background for Giant Tiger. And they've just broke ground. A couple episodes ago, we were talking about broke ground on a brand new headquarters with plans to open up stores, many stores, double-digit stores on a annual basis. So great news, and we wish them continued success. And whatever Thomas Haig gets up to, I'm sure will be interesting. So we wish him, of course, all the best. Korean beauty brand launches Innisfree. This is from Craig Patterson's Retail Insider. Secures a retail space, of course, in Yorkdale. No surprise there. So many brands move into Yorkdale. So this is a South Korean naturalism-oriented cosmetics brand, according to Retail Insider. And they are already, make the point. It is a crowded market. So it'll be interesting to see how they differentiate themselves in the skincare and, in the beauty category. No shortage of beauty retailers even in Yorkdale. So we'll see how that plays out. We wish them all the best. What else have we got? Price of cannabis is as much as 80% higher, retail cannabis, legal retail cannabis, than the black market, according to StatsCan. For those, and of course, this is we've talked to James Terbrake a couple of episodes back, the Economists Cannabis Summit, where he was there, and I had the chance to speak to him. We built the Stats Cannabis, the kind of crowdsourced how much are you paying for your cannabis site, and according to that, the number of people or respondents reporting that are purchasing illegally due to legal cannabis being too expensive was 27%. So this from the National Post. And in some ways, not a surprise that the black market organized crime would react to legal cannabis just by dropping the price, because their price floor is quite low. And we see that even in the news today around Health Canada cracking down on some not so great behavior from one of the LPs. So, you think about price floors as one strategic reaction to legal cannabis. So we'll keep a close eye on that. From retail around the world, and this from CNBC, Lululemon, but it was covered in a bunch of places. Lululemon opening a sprawling 20,000 square foot store with workout classes, restaurants. They're inviting hundreds of people there. I mean, it's really, as they say, the customers these days are looking for more than a transaction, and you really find that reflected in the comments and the chit and chat I did with Carl and Steve at the beginning of the podcast. Untuck's Aaron Sanandres, I think I'm getting that right. A modern retail strategy includes physical retail. So interesting. I bought my first Untucked shirt a week and a half ago at their, what is apparently as we reported, their top store in North America, which is at Sherway, not too far from where I am. So congratulations to them. That from Glossy, great interview, and that's a podcast interview, both text, and it's also an interview that you can listen to. So be sure and check that out in Glossy. From Forbes, store is not just for shoppers. Microsoft will use its first European location to cater to large businesses. That's interesting. 22,000 square foot. This from Forbes, 22,000 square foot, 3-story flagship. So slightly smaller, I think, than the Fifth Avenue one in New York, which has got like 7 floors. Spent much time there with my good friend and colleague Dave Rogerson, and doing tours and all kinds of interesting things. So be keen next time I get over to London, visit that store in Oxford Circus. Interesting article from Fast Company, how Costco became a $7 billion fast fashion powerhouse. So I'm a Costco member. If you've ever been into Costco, lots of apparel in those first steps that you take. What do they say? Millennials rejecting fast fashion, but their parents are still into it, which helps explain Costco's rise. So they're always great assortment. It's a bit of a treasure hunt as well, so it's kind of fun. For retail news for retail entrepreneurs starts off with local-based Bad Boy Furniture. The Lastmans, great furniture business. They started in 1955. Mel Lastman, who became mayor, opened his first Bad Boy store on Weston Road. People wonder why they got or how they got the name Bad Boy. I heard the story that they kept dropping the price on the products they were selling so much that their vendors gave them the nickname of the Bad Boy. Because they continued to kind of not stick to the script, so to speak. I think that's where it gets it from. It's now 45 stores and employs more than 1,000 people. This is from Retail Insider, so congratulations to them. I think they have or are buying some of the Sears space, so certainly the demise of Sears in Canada leaves, and again, back to the conversation that Steve Dennis, Carl, and I were having earlier in the podcast about Sears. Well, the demise of Sears in Canada, such a big player in big ticket, has left room for retailers such as Bad Boy, so we wish them well. From the Vancouver Sun, Vancouver's boldest plan for property tax surges that are killing local business. It's a critical issue in Vancouver. The property taxes, based on the valuation of the properties, are putting small business under not under the wraps, but under a lot of pressure. So a good article in the Vancouver Sun that talks about that. From Ottawa Business Journal from my hometown, Farm Boy buys Rito Bakery. This is such a great story. Jeff York, I guess Farm Boy was, or Rito Bakery, which is an institution in Ottawa, a couple locations, was already supplying to Farm Boy, and they had the owners, longtime owners, I guess got into a little bit of financial difficulty, but more so some health issues that they decided that they needed to exit the business. And they had no one to buy it, so they're going to close down, and it would have been sad to see, but Jeff York and Farm Boy stepped in and bought it. So what a great initiative, and I think it makes knowing Jeff makes great business sense as well. So we wish them luck. That from the Ottawa Business Journal. From Retail Sustainability, great article, and many great articles in this edition of A Canadian Retailer. Next week, by the way, we'll have Canadian Retailer Senior Editor-in-Chief Sean Terry on, as we do often, to explain and tell us all about the different stories that are in the latest edition of Canadian Retailer. Again, from Retail Insider, Pop-Up Zero Waste Grocer Concept secures first permanent retail space. So this is an interesting article, again, from Retail Insider, so do check that out. And lastly in that category, grocery chain Lidl, I should say, to install 4,000 solar panels at its distribution facility in Ireland, represents Ireland's largest ever installation of solar panels, converting sunlight into electricity. Congratulations on them. These big footprint warehouses have a lot of roof space, so kind of an innovative use for sure. All right, well, that's a wrap on this edition of The Voice of Retail. If you like this podcast, you can subscribe on Apple, iTunes, or on your favorite podcast platform, and be sure and recommend to a friend or colleague in the retail industry. You can also ask your favorite home devices, Amazon Echo, Google Home, to play the most recent edition. I'm Michael LeBlanc, founder and president of ME LeBlanc Company, Inc. You can learn more about me on meleblanc.co, or of course on LinkedIn. Until next time, have a great week.